Her sister was dying, a predatory boss demanding a price Amelia couldn't pay. Then she accidentally drenched the city's most dangerous man, Giovanni Moretti, with priceless wine. He left a stack of cash and a silent promise. When her world shattered and she was framed for a crime she didn't commit, Gio, the ruthless mafia boss, launched a brutal, relentless hunt to reclaim what was his. But now she's trapped in his lethal world. Will his obsession save her, or just lead to a darker cage? The air in the Obsidian always tasted of money and unspoken desires. A heady, oppressive blend of aged leather, exotic spices, and the faint, metallic tang of ambition. Amelia Vance moved through it like a ghost, her black uniform a shadow against the gleaming marble floors and the whispered opulence. Tonight, the scent of the rare Chateau Lafite Rothschild 1982 that she'd just decanted for table 7 seemed particularly cruel, its earthy promise of decades-old history mocking her own fractured present. Amelia's fingers, slim and almost delicate, traced the rim of a crystal goblet, feeling the cool, smooth perfection. Her passion wasn't just for the taste of wine, but for its stories, the sun-baked vineyards, the careful hands of the vintner, the silent aging in dark cellars. Each bottle held a narrative, a secret life waiting to be revealed. Here, at the Obsidian, wine was merely a prop, a liquid status symbol, an expensive accessory for men who cared more about the label than the soul within the glass. A bitter taste, far harsher than any tannin, settled on her tongue. She was a sommelier, certified and respected in the quiet circles that genuinely appreciated her craft. Yet, at the Obsidian, her expertise was routinely undermined. Her recommendations often ignored in favor of the flashiest label. Her insights met with dismissive nods. "Just bring the Bordeaux, darling." Victor Thorne, the restaurant's owner, would purr, his voice a slick veneer over something profoundly unsettling. "Our patrons prefer the familiar." He rarely looked at her eyes, his gaze always lingering on her mouth, her collarbone, places that made her skin prickle with discomfort. Amelia hated him, not with a fiery, passionate hatred, but with a deep, cold, aching resentment that settled in her bones. Victor Thorne was a predator in bespoke suits, his smile a carefully calibrated performance. He owned the Obsidian, and by extension, he owned a piece of her dwindling soul. His wealth was flaunted with garish excess, diamond cuff links that caught the light, a signet ring that looked heavy enough to crush bone, and a laugh that grated like rusty hinges. He'd inherited the restaurant, a family legacy tainted by his own brand of avarice and insidious charm. He'd known her father, a fellow sommelier who had once dreamed of owning his own establishment, a dream that had died with him, leaving Amelia and her younger sister, Lily, adrift. Lily. The name was a prayer, a burden, a reason for everything. Lily, fragile and fierce, with eyes the color of summer skies and a smile that could chase away any shadow, even the ones that clung so stubbornly to Amelia. But Lily was sick, a rare autoimmune disease that waged a silent war against her delicate body, draining their meager savings with the ferocity of a desert wind. The bills arrived like silent assassins, thick envelopes from the hospital that Amelia dreaded opening. They piled up on her small kitchen table, a constant crushing reminder of her inadequacy. Her studio apartment in Red Hook was a sanctuary, a small cluttered haven that smelled of old books and dried herbs, a stark contrast to the Obsidian's sterile grandeur. It was there, amidst the chaos of her life, that she had once envisioned her own wine bar. Vino Veritas, she'd named it in her head. Wine and truth. A place where stories were shared, not bought. But that dream felt like a childish fantasy now, a wisp of smoke caught in the relentless grip of reality. Lily's next round of treatment alone would cost more than Amelia earned in 3 months. And Thorne knew. He made sure she knew he knew. "Your sister's medical expenses, Amelia, they are quite substantial, aren't they?" he'd said casually one afternoon, leaning against her wine cart too close, his breath warm on her ear. She could smell his expensive cologne, a cloying blend of cedar and something sickly sweet. It's a shame to see such talent wasted on struggle. His implication was clear. his words a silken threat. He'd offered her a loan months ago, a predatory arrangement disguised as generosity, securing her loyalty and more, with Lily's very life as collateral. It was a debt that seemed to grow exponentially, a leash he tightened whenever he pleased. The weight of it, the suffocating pressure of his unspoken demands, made it hard to breathe sometimes. Her chest felt tight, her shoulders perpetually hunched as if bracing against an invisible blow. She was 28, but the burdens of her life had carved lines of worry around her eyes, etched a permanent weariness onto her graceful frame. She didn't have a life, not really. Only a relentless, exhausting fight for survival. Tonight, the fight felt particularly brutal. The constant stream of demands from the bustling dining room, the clinking of glasses that sounded like tiny, mocking bells, the forced smiles she offered to patrons who barely saw her. She felt like a beautiful antique clock, meticulously wound and displayed, but utterly powerless to choose its own time. Then her phone buzzed in a hidden pocket of her apron, a low, urgent vibration. Amelia's heart seized. She pulled it out, her fingers fumbling, already knowing. It was St. Jude Hospital. Lily's primary nurse. Ms. Vance, it's Elena. We need you here. Lily's had an episode. She's being prepped for emergency surgery. We need your consent. And it's critical, Amelia. The deposit. The words blurred. Emergency surgery. Deposit. The world tilted on its axis. Amelia's hand trembled so violently she nearly dropped the phone. The noise of the restaurant, the clinking, the laughter, the smug murmur of Thorne's voice from across the room, it all faded into a deafening roar in her ears. Lily. Always Lily. Her greatest joy, her deepest wound. A cold sweat broke out on her brow. Where would she get the money? Thorne, she owed him. He wouldn't help. He would demand a price she couldn't pay, a price that would shatter her entirely. The abyss stretched before her, vast and terrifying. She was drowning, hopelessly, irrevocably drowning. She felt a silent scream build in her throat, raw and desperate, but it never escaped. Only a choked gasp. Her gaze drifted past the opulent dining room to the heavy, dark oak door of the velvet room, which remained closed, always reserved for the highest echelon, the most private dealings. It was booked tonight. Someone immensely powerful. Someone far beyond her reach. She stared at it, a desperate, irrational thought flashing through her mind. What if someone could save me? The thought was absurd. No one would. No one could. She looked down at her hands, still clutching the phone. They were shaking. The cold reality crashed over her with the force of a tidal wave. She was alone. Utterly, terribly alone. And the emergency call was about to throw her into the direct path of the most dangerous man in New York. The Velvet Room was a legend whispered in hushed tones even among the Obsidian's elite staff. That seemed to absorb all light and laughter. Tonight, the air within its hallowed confines felt even heavier than usual, thick with the unspoken weight of power. Amelia pushed open the door with a gloved hand, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Giovanni Gio Moretti. The name alone was a cold whisper down her spine. The King of Shadows, they called him. A phantom, a myth, rarely seen in public, yet his influence stretched like an invisible web across the city. His presence, even indirect, made seasoned chefs sweat and hardened bouncers stiffen. Tonight, he was very much direct. He sat at the head of the table, an immovable monolith of quiet authority. His impeccably tailored suit, the color of midnight, seemed to swallow the dim light. Salt and pepper hair, thick and disciplined, framed a face carved from granite, sharp angles softened only by the faint lines around his dark, obsidian-like eyes. They missed nothing. As Amelia entered, his gaze heavy and direct snagged hers for a fleeting, disorienting moment. It wasn't a glance of curiosity or appraisal, but rather a deep, unnerving observation, as if he could see straight into the frantic pulse in her throat. Four other men, equally severe in their attire, sat around the table. Their faces were impassive, their silence absolute. A half-finished plate of rare steak and a crystal glass of water sat before Gio. He hadn't touched the wine list Amelia had carefully curated for his table, a selection of robust, old-world reds befitting a man of his stature and reputation. Ms. Vance, Victor Thorne's voice, usually unctuous, was unusually sharp beside her. Mr. Moretti prefers the Chateau Margaux 1900. I believe it's from cellar B. Be extremely careful. Amelia's stomach clenched. The Margaux 1900. A legendary vintage, a ghost of a wine, valued at more than her annual salary. It was kept under lock and key, rarely brought out. Thorne had never allowed her to handle it before, always claiming she lacked the finesse. This was a test. A cruel, calculated maneuver designed to trip her, to humiliate her, especially in front of him. The thought made a hot flush creep up her neck. Thorne knew about Lily, about the surgery. He was enjoying this. She nodded, her voice caught in her throat. Yes, Mr. Thorne. Retreating to the cellar, her hands were steady as she carefully retrieved the precious bottle. But her mind was a tempest. Lily. Emergency surgery. The deposit. The words of the nurse echoed, a drumbeat of terror in her head. She knew Thorne wouldn't help. He would just revel in her desperation. The irony was suffocating. Here she was, holding a bottle worth the king's ransom, while her sister's life hung by a thread, contingent on money she didn't have. Then justice was a bitter gall in her mouth. Back in the velvet room, the atmosphere was even more charged. Joe's men watched her, their expressions unreadable, like silent gargoyles. Gio himself remained impassive, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the gleaming tabletop, yet Amelia felt the weight of his attention. She performed a ritual of decanting with practiced grace, her movements fluid and precise despite the tremor deep within her. The deep crimson liquid, almost black in the dim light, poured like liquid history into the waiting decanter. The scent was intoxicating, old leather, dried roses, a hint of something feral and wild. It smelled like secrets. It smelled like power. She carefully carried the decanter to Joe's side, her breathing shallow. Her entire career, Lily's very survival, felt precariously balanced on this moment. She reached out, extending the decanter towards his waiting glass. And then her phone vibrated again, a violent, insistent buzz against her thigh. It was the hospital. The nurse. Again. The urgency of it shattered her fragile focus. Her hand spasmed, a barely perceptible jolt, but it was enough. The decanter, heavy and suddenly alien in her grip, tilted. Time seemed to stretch, agonizingly. The dark, precious liquid surged, a crimson wave, then cascaded. Not into the glass, but over the edge, splashing onto Gio Moretti's immaculately tailored, obsidian black suit. A dark, blossoming stain spread across his chest, a stark, violent contrast against the pristine fabric. The sound, or rather the sudden absence of sound, was deafening. The room plunged into an immediate, deathly silence, so profound it felt like the world itself had stopped breathing. Amelia froze, her arms still extended, the decanter now upright, but empty, dripping. Her blood ran cold. The exquisite, intoxicating aroma of the ancient wine filled the room, now tainted with the bitter tang of catastrophe. Her gaze, wide with horror, snapped to Gio Moretti. He hadn't moved. Not an inch. His expression remained utterly impassive, a mask of stone. Only his eyes, dark as midnight and suddenly piercing, locked onto hers. They were bottomless, revealing nothing, yet seeming to absorb everything. A cold dread, colder than any fear she had ever known, seeped into her bones. She had not only committed a cardinal sin in the world of fine dining, but she had done it to him. The King of Shadows, Victor Thorne, who had been hovering near the door, let out a slow, satisfied exhale. A cruel, triumphant smirk stretched across his face, his eyes gleaming with malice. This was it. This was the end. He would humiliate her, destroy her career, and then he would claim his price. Amelia could feel the weight of his gaze, more threatening than Joe's silent stare. A tremor started deep within Amelia, traveling up her arms, making her whole body feel fragile, as if it would shatter into a million pieces. Shame, humiliation, but beneath it, a primal fear. Not just for her job, not just for Lily, but for what this man, this silent, powerful man, might do. They said he was dangerous. They said he was ruthless. What kind of retribution awaited her? Gio finally stirred. A slow, deliberate movement. His hand, large and powerful, rose, not towards her, not towards the spilled wine, but simply waved, a dismissive gesture in the air. A soft, guttural word escaped his lips, a breath of Italian that seemed to hang in the air, oddly intimate in its quietness. Niente. Nothing. Amelia blinked, bewildered. Nothing. Then, with another deliberate motion, he reached into his inner jacket pocket. Not for a weapon, not for a handkerchief. He pulled out a thick wad of cash, a stack of $100 bills that seemed impossibly large. He laid it on the table with a soft thud, pushing it towards her. For the suit, he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, surprisingly calm. And the wine. He looked at her again, his dark eyes lingering, unwavering. This time, there was something else in their depths. Not anger. Not disgust. Something unreadable. Question? Promise? Threat? Amelia couldn't tell. Her mind reeled. As he rose, his men following his lead, the silence of the velvet room was finally broken by the soft scrape of chairs. Gio Moretti walked past her, his gaze holding hers until the very last moment. Then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut behind him, leaving Amelia alone with the lingering scent of expensive wine, the terrifying relief, and Victor Thorne's triumphant, predatory smile. Thorne approached her, his eyes glinting. Well, Amelia, it seems you've made an impression. A very expensive one. You'll give me that money, of course, to cover my losses. His voice dropped, thick with insinuation. And perhaps we can discuss your other debts now, darling. Lily's hospital bills won't pay themselves, will they? And after tonight, who else would ever hire you? Amelia stared at the thick stack of cash on the table, still warm from Joe's hand. It was more money than she had ever seen. Enough to pay Lily's deposit, perhaps even a year of bills. But Thorne would take it all. And he would still demand his pound of flesh. She felt a shiver, a cold premonition, knowing that despite Joe's strange, silent dismissal, she had just stepped into something far more dangerous than a spilled drink. The King of Shadows had left her with a choice, or perhaps he had simply marked her. The week following the incident in the Velvet Room felt less like passing days and more like a slow, deliberate tightening of a noose. Victor Thorne, far from being cowed by Gio Moretti's enigmatic presence, seemed to have taken it as a perverse validation. He assumed Amelia had no powerful allies, that the King of Shadows had merely dismissed her as an irrelevant, clumsy server, leaving her fair game for his own twisted desires. His predatory smile was now a constant fixture. His eyes, dark and knowing, followed her every move. Amelia, darling, he'd purr, cornering her in the dimly lit wine cellar, his voice a sticky caress that made her skin crawl. Such a pretty face wasted on worry. He'd run a finger, slow and deliberate, along the dusty spine of a wine bottle near her shoulder, his proximity suffocating. Still struggling with those hospital bills. Lily's condition can be quite demanding, can't it? The casual mention of Lily was a knife twist, a constant reminder of his leverage. He made no direct threats, not yet, but the implication hung heavy in the air, a poisonous miasma. He'd suggest she stay late to help with inventory, always alone, always with that chilling glint in his eyes. Amelia learned to move faster, to anticipate his movements, to build invisible walls around herself. She lived in a constant state of hyper-awareness, every shadow a potential threat, every casual glance a judgment. The shame from the spilled wine still burned, but was quickly overshadowed by the escalating fear for Lily. The hospital calls continued, each one a fresh stab of panic. They needed the outstanding balance cleared, or Lily's next round of medication, vital for her fragile immune system, would be delayed. I have to get out, she thought, her desperation a raw ache in her chest. I have to. Amelia spent every spare moment, snatched in secret on her battered old laptop, applying for other sommelier positions across the city. She drafted eloquent cover letters, detailing her expertise, her awards, her unwavering passion for viticulture. She went on interviews, hopeful and nervous, at respectable bistros and up-and-coming wine bars. They all started promisingly, the interviewers impressed by her resume, her knowledge. She would leave feeling a fleeting spark of hope, a tiny flicker in the encroaching darkness. But then the calls would stop, or she'd receive terse, impersonal emails. While your qualifications are exemplary, we've decided to move forward with another candidate at this time. No explanation, no feedback, just a dead end. Each rejection was a punch to the gut, chipping away at her resolve. She knew. She didn't have proof, but she knew it was Thorne. His reach was longer, his influence more insidious than she'd imagined. He was systematically blacklisting her, ensuring she remained trapped, dependent. The thought was a bitter, metallic taste in her mouth. He wasn't just a predatory boss. He was a silent captor. One afternoon, as Amelia trudged home through the damp, gray streets of Red Hook, the biting chill of late autumn seeping into her thin coat, she noticed it again. A sleek, obsidian black sedan parked discreetly across the street from her apartment building. Not the same model, perhaps, but the same unsettling color, the same air of quiet power. It had been there before. A week ago. Then a few days later. Always parked, always empty, yet always watching. A shiver, not entirely from the cold, ran down her spine. Was it Thorne's doing? A new form of intimidation? Or was it Gio Moretti? The thought sent a confusing mix of fear and a strange, dangerous thrill through her veins. Was she being surveilled? Monitored? The idea should have terrified her completely, but a tiny, rebellious part of her felt a bizarre sense of recognition. Someone was paying attention. Someone saw her, even if that someone was a terrifying crime boss. The following day, a nondescript delivery van pulled up to her building. A burly man in a worn uniform, his face impassive, handed her a package. "Sign here, Ms. Vance. Special delivery." The box was heavy, wrapped in plain brown paper. Amelia's hands, still raw from scrubbing wine stains off the floor after Thorne's latest accident, trembled slightly as she tore open the packaging. Inside, nestled in a bed of pristine straw, was a bottle of wine. Not just any wine. Her breath hitched. It was a 1999 Sassicaia, a Super Tuscan, her absolute favorite vintage, a wine she'd once tasted during her sommelier training and dreamed of ever since. Thorne had always dismissed her love for it as too rustic for the Obsidian's clientele, a subtle jab at her own humble origins. This bottle, pristine and perfect, felt like a deliberate act of defiance. Beneath the bottle, a small, elegantly embossed card lay face down. Amelia flipped it over, her heart accelerating. G. Moretti Solutions. The blood drained from her face, then rushed back, hot and tingling. Gio Moretti. He knew her favorite wine. He knew where she lived. And he was offering solutions. The card felt both like an olive branch and a silken noose. Was this an invitation? A warning? A test? Her mind spun, a kaleidoscope of conflicting emotions. Fear warred with a desperate, reckless hope. This was a man of shadows, a king of a dangerous, unseen world. Getting involved with him could mean ruin, could mean plunging into an abyss far deeper than the one Thorne had created. But staying with Thorne meant a slow, agonizing suffocation, the certain death of her dreams, and possibly Lily's well-being. She clutched the wine bottle, its cool glass a solid anchor in her shaking hands. Solutions? What kind of solutions did a man like Gio Moretti offer? And what would he demand in return? The black car, Across the street seemed to shimmer in her peripheral vision, a silent, powerful guardian, or perhaps a velvet-lined cage waiting to be sprung. The choice, she realized with a sickening lurch, might not be hers to make. She was already in his orbit, whether she liked it or not. The whisper of danger was growing louder, but so was the hint of a terrifying, intoxicating hope. The changes began subtly, like the imperceptible shift in the tide. Amelia, constantly braced for the next blow from Victor Thorne, found herself instead navigating an eerie, unaccustomed calm. The relentless calls from St. Jude's about Lily's outstanding balance dwindled, then ceased. Instead, Elena, Lily's nurse, spoke with a puzzled cheerfulness. "Ms. Vance, I don't know who to thank, but Lily's private room has been upgraded. And her new medication, it's the latest cutting-edge treatment. All covered." Amelia's heart swelled with a dizzying mix of relief and profound confusion. Who? How? The only name that echoed in her mind was G. Moretti Solutions, but to associate a crime boss with such unexpected benevolence felt like a jarring discord. Thorne, meanwhile, grew increasingly agitated. His usual predatory swagger was replaced by a simmering frustration. His late-night inventory checks with Amelia mysteriously evaporated. More than once, he'd bark at her. That damned client meeting on Tuesday was canceled at the last minute. Again. Are you sure you're keeping your calendar clear, Vance? His accusations were baseless, his fury misplaced, and Amelia, though outwardly apologetic, felt a dangerous surge of quiet satisfaction. Someone, somewhere, was interfering on her behalf. The black sedan outside her apartment became a less frequent visitor, or perhaps she simply saw it differently now. Not a threat, but a silent, watchful sentinel. The feeling of being observed persisted, a strange, almost comforting blanket in the oppressive chill of her solitude. It was unnerving, yes, to know she was a subject of interest to someone so powerful and enigmatic, but it was also compelling. Then, Gio Moretti began to appear in the main dining room of the Obsidian. Not in the secluded velvet room, but at a prominent corner table, strategically placed. He would arrive alone, always impeccably dressed, his presence a ripple of silence through the bustling restaurant. He never ate much, often just a single espresso, his dark gaze sweeping the room with an almost clinical detachment, except when it landed on Amelia. The first time it happened, she was recommending a robust Cabernet Sauvignon to a boisterous table of venture capitalists. She felt it before she saw it, a shift in air, a sudden weight of attention. Her eyes drifted, almost involuntarily, to Joe's table. He wasn't overtly staring, but his head was angled, his posture subtly oriented towards her. His dark eyes, like polished obsidian, held hers across the crowded room, a silent, intense connection that stole the breath from her lungs. A hot flush crept up her neck, a nervous flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a forbidden, dangerous attraction. He saw her, really saw her, not as a clumsy server, not as a desperate woman, but as her. The intensity of his gaze was a shock, a sudden drenching rain after years of parched invisibility. Later that evening, as Amelia was polishing crystalware behind the bar, the distinct scent of expensive cologne, cedar, and something smoky and undeniably masculine preceded him. He stood a few feet away, his shadow falling long across the gleaming bar. "Ms. Vance." His voice was a low, resonant murmur, a sound that vibrated deep in her chest. Amelia turned slowly, her heart thumping. "Mr. Moretti, the Cabernet you recommended to table 6, he began, his eyes unwavering. The 2018 vintage. A bold choice, considering their usual preference for lighter, more conventional wines. His lips, thin and precise, quirked to the corner, a hint of a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Amelia, surprised by his observation, felt a spark of her professional pride ignite. They were discussing a risky new investment. I felt a wine with a certain audacity would reflect their current mindset. It also has a surprising finish, a promise of something rewarding after an initial challenge. She heard the subtle double meaning in her own words, and saw the flicker of understanding in his eyes. He nodded slowly, his gaze holding hers. A fascinating analysis. Most sommeliers simply recite vintages. You tell stories. His voice was devoid of irony, a genuine compliment that landed like a bomb on her bruised self-esteem. It was so different from Thorne's condescending remarks, from his forced pleasantries that always felt laced with poison. Joe's words, though few, carried immense weight, like solid, precious stones. "Thank you, Mr. Moretti," she managed, her cheeks warm. "Giovanni," he corrected, his voice softer, almost an invitation. "Or Gio?" Amelia's breath hitched. "Gio?" The name, whispered, felt intimate, dangerous. "Amelia," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. He lingered for a moment longer, his gaze dropping to her hands, then sweeping up to her eyes, before he gave a curt nod and walked away, disappearing into the ebb and flow of the restaurant's controlled chaos. The interaction was brief, almost imperceptible to anyone else, yet for Amelia, it felt like an earthquake. The accidental encounters continued over the next few weeks. Gio would appear, sometimes at a bar, sometimes at a small table, always observing. He never demanded her time, never interrupted her work, but their eyes would meet and a silent conversation would pass between them, a shared understanding that deepened with each glance. He would ask about obscure regional wines she had recommended, his questions intelligent and probing, revealing a surprising depth of knowledge. He never mentioned Thorne, never acknowledged the threats looming over her, but his presence itself was a shield. Thorne, seemingly oblivious to the unspoken dynamics, only saw Gio as a valuable, if temperamental, patron. He never dared to approach Amelia when Gio was in the room. The sexual tension between them was a taut, invisible wire, humming with unspoken desires. It was in the way his gaze lingered, the barely perceptible tilt of his head when she spoke, the quiet intensity that surrounded him. Amelia felt it in the racing of her pulse, the sudden warmth that bloomed in her stomach whenever he was near. It was terrifying, exhilarating. This man, a walking shadow of power and danger, was also the only one who truly seemed to see her, to value her voice, her passion, her very essence. One particularly grueling evening, after Thorne had deliberately overworked her, demanding she stay late to re-inventory an entire section of the cellar by hand, Amelia felt close to breaking. Her hands were raw, her body ached, and tears pricked at her eyes. As she finally emerged from the cold, damp depths of the cellar, clutching a heavy box of old vintages, she stumbled slightly, exhaustion making her vision blur. Before she could fall, a strong, firm hand was there, steadying her arm. "Careful," Joe's voice, low and gravelly, was right beside her ear. He had appeared from nowhere, a silent phantom in the dim corridor. His touch, though fleeting, sent a jolt of electricity through her. It was solid, possessive, yet undeniably protective. He took the box from her, effortlessly, as if it weighed nothing. His fingers, calloused yet precise, brushed hers. The brief contact ignited a fire in her veins. He didn't ask what she was doing, didn't question why she was alone. He simply looked at the box, then back at her, his eyes unreadable, yet filled with a silent, simmering fury that Amelia suspected was not for her, but for whatever had brought her to this point. "Go home, Amelia," he murmured, his voice softer now, a command laced with something akin to tenderness. "You look exhausted." He stood there, a dark, imposing silhouette, holding the box, watching her until she had safely, if shakily, walked out the staff exit. Amelia didn't know what to make of him. He was a paradox, a dangerous man who offered unexpected kindness, a silent observer who saw more than anyone else. The warmth of his touch lingered on her arm, a brand that spoke of both danger and an intoxicating promise. She felt drawn to him, against all logic, against all reason. But the path to his world was cielo choked with thorns, and she knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that she was about to step into it. The obsidian buzzed with the opulent hum of a Friday night. Crystal chandeliers glittered, reflecting off polished silverware, and the knowing glint in the eyes of the city's elite. Amelia, Moving between tables with a grace born of exhaustion and practice felt a strange sense of reprieve. Thorne's insidious advances had ceased, his menacing smiles replaced by a brooding, frustrated scowl. Lily's new medication was working wonders, her spirits lifting with each passing day. The Sasakiah sat on her kitchen counter, an unopened promise, a silent question. And the black car, though rarely seen, was a comfort, a whisper of protection in the echoing loneliness of her life. This false calm was precisely what Victor Thorne sought to shatter. Attention, everyone! Thorne's voice, amplified by a sudden jarring clap, cut through the sophisticated din. He stood in the center of the main dining room, a theatrical smirk plastered on his face, his gaze sweeping over the tables, finally landing on Amelia. He was holding a bottle of Chateau Margaux, a common vintage but pristine. Beside him stood a small trolley with several empty glasses and a half-filled decanter. Amelia's heart dropped. A cold premonition seized her. This was it, the public execution. I regret to inform our esteemed patrons, Thorne continued, his voice dripping with feigned concern, that we've encountered a regrettable incident concerning a recent shipment of our prized French wines. A mishandling, shall we say, of a rather delicate vintage. His eyes, sharp as broken glass, fixed on Amelia. Our head sommelier, Ms. Amelia Vance, has unfortunately overseen this lapse in quality control. A murmur rippled through the room. Amelia felt every eye turn to her, the weight of their judgment suffocating. Her cheeks burned with a sudden, scorching heat. He was lying. This couldn't be happening. Ms. Vance, Thorne beckoned her with a condescending flick of his wrist. Would you care to explain why this bottle, from a freshly uncorked case, exhibits a clear fault? The aroma is distinctly corked. Undrinkable, I'm afraid. He held the bottle out dramatically, inviting sniffs and murmurs of agreement from several nearby tables. The accusation hung heavy, a public declaration of her incompetence, a direct assault on her professional integrity. Amelia's mind raced. Corked. Impossible. She personally inspected every case, every bottle. Her sense of smell was her most valuable asset. She could detect even the slightest hint of TCA. This was a setup. A blatant, cruel lie. Mr. Thorne, that's impossible, Amelia managed, her voice trembling despite her furious resolve. I checked that shipment myself. There were no faults. Thorne chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. Ah, the passion of the young. But sometimes passion can blind us to reality, can it, darling? Perhaps you were distracted recently. His gaze lingered on her meaningfully, a thinly veiled reference to Lily's illness and her desperate financial situation. The implication was clear. Her personal life was making her incompetent. A wave of hot, visceral anger washed over Amelia, momentarily eclipsing her shame. He was not just attacking her career. He was attacking her as a woman, a sister, a human being. The injustice of it all, the blatant cruelty, made her fingers clench into tight fists. She wanted to scream, to shatter the elegant facade of this restaurant, to expose him for the venomous snake he was. But the words died on her lips, caught in the stifling atmosphere of judgment and Thorne's smug triumph. Just as the humiliation threatened to swallow her whole, a familiar ripple moved through the crowd. A sudden hush, a palpable shift in the air pressure. A shadow, darker than any other in the opulent room, detached itself from the entrance. Giovanni Moretti. He moved with a languid, unhurried grace that commanded attention. His eyes, dark and unreadable, swept over the scene, acknowledging no one, yet seeing everything. He stopped a few feet from Thorne, his presence a silent, undeniable force. Mr. Moretti. Thorne's carefully constructed composure wavered, a flicker of surprise and annoyance crossing his face. A pleasure as always. You've caught us at a rather unfortunate moment. Gio didn't respond. His gaze, colder than any winter wind, settled on Thorne, then on the corked bottle in his hand. He then looked at Amelia, a brief, piercing glance that held a silent question, a silent promise. Indeed, Joe's voice was a low, resonant rumble, cutting through the strained silence. He didn't raise it, yet it carried an undeniable authority that silenced even Thorne's bluster. Unfortunate for you, Mr. Thorne. I find myself contemplating the quality of all your recent acquisitions. Thorne's smirk faltered. I assure you, Mr. Moretti, the Obsidian maintains the highest standards. This is merely an isolated incident, a momentary lapse. He waved a dismissive hand at Amelia. Joe's eyes narrowed, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift that sent a shiver of fear down Amelia's spine, not for herself, but for Thorne. Lapse. Geo repeated, the word a soft, dangerous hiss. Or a systemic rot, Mr. Thorne? I recently acquired an interest in a consortium funding your latest expansion. He paused, letting the implication hang. I recall seeing a rather optimistic projection in their books, one that depended heavily on the renegotiation of certain supplier contracts. Thorne's face, usually ruddy with self-importance, paled significantly. His jaw clenched. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Joe's voice dropped, becoming even more chillingly quiet. I also recall a rather peculiar discrepancy in your last quarterly report. A ghost investment, perhaps? Or merely a convenient ledger entry to disappear certain funds meant for your legitimate business interests. Funds that might, say, be tied to your personal gambling debts, perhaps at the tables of certain unforgiving individuals. The air was suddenly thick with unspoken threats. The elegant diners, initially curious, now looked genuinely uncomfortable. Whispers broke out, not about Amelia, but about Thorne. The casual mention of unforgiving individuals and gambling debts was a thinly veiled warning, a subtle but devastating strike at Thorne's carefully constructed facade of respectability. He wasn't just being accused of a financial misstep. He was being outed as a compromised, dishonest, and desperate man. His clients, many of them pillars of the legitimate business world, exchanged nervous glances. No one wanted to be associated with someone like that. Thorne's eyes darted frantically around the room, fear finally supplanting his arrogant disdain. He had underestimated Gio Moretti. He had not only attacked Amelia, but by doing so, had drawn the attention of a man who saw everything, knew everything, and played by rules far deadlier than his own. His power, Amelia realized with a surge of awe, was not just brute force, but an intricate web of knowledge and influence that could dismantle a man's life with a few quiet words. Joe's gaze, cold and uncompromising, returned to Thorne. Perhaps, Mr. Thorne, you should focus less on blaming your staff for phantom wine faults and more on the very real faults in your own ledger. Before someone else decides to audit them permanently, the unspoken threat was clear. With a final dismissive glance at Thorne, who now stood rigid and white-faced, Gio turned his attention to Amelia. His dark eyes softened infinitesimally, a silent acknowledgement, a silent promise. Ms. Vance, he said, his voice returning to that low, resonant rumble that made her feel oddly seen, oddly safe. I believe this establishment could benefit from a sommelier whose judgment is not compromised by extraneous factors. He gave her a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, then turned and walked out of the Obsidian as silently as he had entered, leaving behind a wake of shocked silence and a thoroughly dismantled Victor Thorne. Amelia stood amidst the wreckage of Thorne's reputation, a complex cocktail of emotion swirling within her. The shame was gone, replaced by a fierce, triumphant pride. She was no longer just a sommelier. She was someone who mattered, someone protected. But the cost of that protection, the depth of the world she had just been exposed to, sent a fresh shiver of apprehension through her. Gio Moretti had saved her, yes, but he had also irrevocably pulled her into his dangerous orbit. And she knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that this was only the beginning of his game. The days after Thorne's public humiliation were a strange mix of exhilaration and unease for Amelia. The Obsidian felt different. Thorne's usual swagger was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed, venomous glare that he reserved solely for her. He spoke little, but the raw hatred in his eyes was a potent, suffocating threat. Yet he made no moves. He seemed paralyzed, a snake stunned by a far deadlier predator. The restaurant no longer felt like a gilded cage, but a precarious truce, a temporary ceasefire brokered by a silent, unseen hand. Amelia found herself living in a suspended state, the fear for Lily eased by an invisible hand, the threats from Thorn held at bay by an unseen force. But the quietude was deceptive. She needed answers. The Sasakiah sat on her counter, a constant reminder of the man who had pulled her from the brink, a man whose intentions remained a dark, alluring mystery. The card, G. Moretti's Solutions, burned a hole in her thoughts. She couldn't simply accept his help without understanding the cost. One crisp autumn evening, as she finished her shift, a sleek black sedan, not the one she'd seen parked near her apartment, pulled up to the staff exit. The back window lowered silently, revealing the impassive face of a man she'd seen with Gio. "Ms. Vance, Mr. Moretti requests your presence. He believes you have questions." His voice was respectful, yet brooked no argument. A jolt of apprehension, sharp and sudden, pierced through Amelia. This was it, the moment of reckoning. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm against the quiet authority of the invitation. Fear mingled with a curious pull, a need to understand the powerful, enigmatic man who had so irrevocably altered her world. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the luxurious silence of the car. The leather seats were cool beneath her, the scent of expensive wood and something uniquely masculine, cedar and that hint of smoke, filled the enclosed space. The car drove her away from the familiar grime of Red Hook, through the glittering arteries of Manhattan, finally stopping before a discreet, unmarked brownstone in a quiet, tree-lined street. It exuded an understated elegance, a stark contrast to the obsidian's gaudy opulence. Inside, the house was a sanctuary of dark wood, worn rugs, and the comforting scent of old books and something savory cooking. Gio Moretti stood in a dimly lit study, framed by towering bookshelves. He wasn't in a suit, but a dark cashmere sweater that softened his formidable shoulders, revealing the powerful lines of his physique. His hands, large and scarred, rested on an open book. He looked up as she entered, his dark eyes, usually so guarded, holding a flicker of something Amelia couldn't quite decipher. Expectation? Vulnerability? "Amelia," he acknowledged, his voice a low thrum. "Thank you for coming." He gestured to a deep leather armchair. "Please sit." She sat, her back straight, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of a log fire in the hearth. It was intense, but not uncomfortable. It was a silence that invited honesty. "Why?" Amelia finally asked, her voice a little steadier than she felt. "Why did you help me? Why Lily's treatment? Why Thorn?" Gio moved to a mahogany desk, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. Not wine, but something dark and aged. Scotch, she suspected. He handed one to her, his fingers brushing hers, a brief, electrifying touch. "You were being preyed upon, Amelia," he began, his voice gravelly, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the fireplace. "Thorn is a fool, but a dangerous one. He doesn't understand the rules. He confuses weakness with opportunity. I don't tolerate that." He paused, taking a sip of his drink. The firelight flickered across his face, casting deep shadows that softened the hard angles. "I've seen it too many times. Vulnerable people with talent, with worth, crushed by those who only see them as pawns." His eyes, dark pools of memory, finally met hers. "My father, he was a pragmatic man. Hard. But he had a code. He despised bullies. He taught me that true power isn't about crushing the weak, but protecting what is valuable. And you, Amelia, you are valuable. Your passion, your eye for beauty, your resilience. It is a rare thing in this city." Amelia stared at him, bewildered. He wasn't a knight in shining armor, but a king in shadows, speaking of protection with an almost brutal honesty. The words settled in her heart, not as flattery, but as a profound recognition of her deepest self. She saw a glimpse of the man behind the myth, a man burdened by responsibility, hardened by a world she could barely fathom, yet driven by a fierce, almost archaic sense of justice. He too carried scars, not just visible ones, but deeper, invisible wounds etched by the demands of his world. And Thorne's faults? Amelia pressed, her voice softer now, her initial fear replaced by a burgeoning trust. Joe's lips curved into a faint, grim smile. Thorne was borrowing from certain associates to fund his lavish lifestyle and his failing ventures. He was skimming from his legitimate businesses, including funds from investors I have a vested interest in protecting. When he began to involve you to use your sister's illness as leverage, it became my concern. He had to be reminded of his place. The quiet menace in his voice was chilling, yet Amelia felt no fear, only a strange sense of vindication. I have a dream, Amelia found herself saying, the words spilling out, emboldened by his honesty. A small wine bar, Vino Veritas, a place where wine is cherished, not just consumed, where stories are told, not like the obsidian. Gio listened, his gaze unblinking, his expression unreadable, yet Amelia felt his complete attention. When she finished, he simply nodded. Beautiful dream, Amelia. A truthful one. His eyes, however, held a flicker of something else, a deep-seated weariness she hadn't noticed before. My world, it doesn't allow for such open dreams. It demands vigilance, constant watchfulness. The weight of it is heavy. He looked out the window at the glittering city lights, a vast, complex tapestry of power and shadows. I often wonder what it would be like to simply create, to nurture something beautiful, like you do with your wines, with your art. A profound wave of empathy washed over Amelia. Beneath the granite exterior, the unyielding power, there was a man who yearned for something simpler, something genuine. He admired her for the very thing he felt denied himself. The invisible scars she sensed in him resonated with her own. She rose, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name, and walked towards him. He turned, his dark eyes meeting hers, holding her gaze. The air crackled with a silent current, a desperate yearning from both of them. He was dangerous, terrifyingly so, yet in this moment, he was simply a man burdened by his own kingdom, admiring the fragile, fierce light of hers. It's not just about creating, Amelia whispered, reaching out, her hand hovering, then gently settling on his arm. His muscles were taut beneath the cashmere, warm and unyielding. It's about having something worth protecting. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, dark and intense. He raised his free hand, his calloused thumb gently brushing her cheekbone, a feather-light touch that sent shivers down her spine. The scent of cedar and smoke enveloped her. You are worth protecting, Amelia. His voice was a raw, guttural murmur. Then, slowly, deliberately, he leaned down. His lips, firm and warm, brushed hers. It was not a kiss of demand or passion, but tentative exploration, a soft, questioning press that tasted of aged scotch and unspoken promises. A gentle, searing caress that spoke of trust, of a fragile connection forged in the crucible of fear and shared understanding. It was a silent acknowledgement of the bond that was deepening between them, an undeniable pull that defied logic and danger. When he finally pulled back, Amelia's breath hitched. Her lips tingled, her body humming with a dangerous awareness. His eyes, still dark and unfathomable, held a new depth, a hint of something fierce and possessive. He had kissed her. No words, no promises, just a silent, profound understanding. She knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that her world had irrevocably shifted, and she was falling, deeply, dangerously, and there was no turning back. The truce, as Amelia had silently labeled it, shattered with the suddenness of breaking glass. Victor Thorne, stripped of his power, his reputation in tatters, simmered like a venomous pit viper in the ruins of his empire. Gio Moretti's warning had done its work, rendering Thorne impotent within the legitimate world he craved. The Obsidian, now under a shadowy, unspoken management, became a suffocating reminder of his fall from grace. He still stalked its corridors, a ghost of his former self, his eyes blazing with a raw, undiluted hatred. And Amelia, thriving under the subtle shift in atmosphere, oblivious to the deeper machinations, became the sole focus of his deranged vengeance. He needed to make her pay. To make Gio pay by destroying the one thing he seemed to protect. Thorne, now a man with nothing left to lose, became truly dangerous. He spent days holed up, plotting, fueled by cheap whiskey and a festering malice. His network, once legitimate, now consisted of desperate lowlives and disgruntled former employees. He concocted a plan, intricate and cruel, designed to strike at Amelia's very essence and deliver a crippling blow to Joe's impenetrable facade. The night it happened, the rain lashed against Amelia's red hook windows, a relentless drumbeat against the glass. She had just returned from a long, satisfying shift at the Obsidian, where for the first time in years, she felt genuinely respected. Lily's recovery was progressing beautifully, her bright laughter now a frequent melody in their sparse apartment. Amelia even allowed herself to think of Gio, of his quiet strength, the touch of his lips, the impossible tenderness hidden beneath layers of danger. A dangerous, intoxicating hope had begun to bloom in her chest. Then the doorbell rang, a harsh, insistent buzz that ripped through the quiet evening. Amelia's heart leaped into her throat. Who? It was late. Too late for casual visitors. A chilling premonition, cold and sharp, pierced through her fragile sense of peace. She hesitated, peering through the peephole. Two figures. Uniformed police officers. Her blood ran cold. She opened the door, her hand trembling. Ms. Amelia Vance? The taller officer asked, his voice clipped and official. Yes. Can I help you? She swallowed, her throat suddenly dry. We have a warrant for your arrest, Ms. Vance. On charges of grand larceny and embezzlement. The words hit her like a physical blow. Grand larceny? Embezzlement? Her mind reeled, desperately searching for a rational explanation. What? No, there must be a mistake. I haven't. We received an anonymous tip, Ms. Vance, the second officer interjected, already pushing past her into her small apartment. And some rather compelling evidence. He gestured towards her workbench, a sacred space where she meticulously studied wine maps and tasting notes. Her eyes darted to it, confusion warring with a rising panic. On the workbench, stark against her familiar notebooks, lay a small, velvet-lined box. It was open. Inside, on a bed of faded silk, rested a single, incredibly rare silver decanter, intricately etched. The 18th century Moretti decanter. An irreplaceable family heirloom, a centerpiece of Joe's private collection, supposedly kept in a high-security vault. Amelia had seen a photo of it once in a rare book on Italian antiquities. And beside it, a small, meticulously engraved silver key, bearing the distinct crest of the Moretti family. Amelia stared aghast. Her hands flew to her mouth. No. I've never seen that before. I swear. Your fingerprints are all over it, Ms. Vance, the first officer stated flatly, holding up a transparent evidence bag containing a similar, though smaller, silver key. And this key was found in the lock of Mr. Giovanni Moretti's private vault just this afternoon. Panic, cold and suffocating, seized her. Fingerprints? How? Thorne. It had to be Thorne. He had access to the Obsidian, to her studio, to... She remembered the Sassicaia, the anonymous delivery, the card. Had Gio been testing her? Or had Thorne used that moment to plant something? This is a setup. Victor Thorne, she began, but the officers cut her off. Mr. Thorne's testimony, along with security footage anomalies and financial discrepancies linking funds to your sister's treatment, paints a rather damning picture, Ms. Vance. And as for Mr. Moretti, well, let's just say he's less than pleased about the breach of his security. The officer's words twisted the knife in her heart. Jill, less than pleased. The image of his dark, impassive eyes, the unyielding set of his jaw, flashed in her mind. Had he believed Thorne? Had her single act of clumsiness, that spilled wine, been nothing more than a carefully orchestrated precursor to a much larger, more devastating trap? Was the protection, the subtle touches, the brief, tender kiss, all of it a lie? A calculated manipulation to ensnare her? The thought was a searing, agonizing wound. He had seen her vulnerability, her desperation, and used it against her. He betrayed me. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The hope, the terrifying, intoxicating hope he had ignited in her, curdled into a bitter, poisoned ash. He had allowed her to fall, to open her heart, only to use her as a scapegoat, a pawn in some larger, darker game. The silence from him, the lack of explanation for Lily's treatment, the mystery of the Sassicaia, it all clicked into place, a horrifying mosaic of manipulation. As the officers moved to cuff her, a frantic, desperate thought pierced through the haze of despair. Lily. If she was arrested, what would happen to Lily? Thorne would ensure she lost everything. And Gio would allow it. She couldn't let that happen. Not after everything. She saw her chance. The officers, confident in their capture, momentarily looked away, their attention caught by a faint scratching at the door, likely her neighbor's cat. In that split second, Amelia moved. Her sommelier training had taught her quick, precise movements. She twisted, her elbow catching one officer unexpectedly. The other lunged, but she was already through the open door, a wild, primal scream tearing through her lungs. She ran. Not towards help, not towards justice, but away. Away from the flashing blue lights, away from Thorne's vindictive grin, away from the agonizing betrayal of Gio Moretti. She ran through the cold, driving rain, her thin blouse clinging to her skin, her hair plastered to her face. She felt utterly, terribly alone, a broken woman fleeing a world that had promised salvation only to deliver the deepest cut. The city lights blurred around her, a dizzying carousel of false promises. She heard the distant wail of sirens, growing closer, echoing the frantic beat of her own terrified heart. She was a fugitive, a pariah, hunted by both the law and, she now truly believed, by the man who had once offered solutions. The King of Shadows hadn't saved her. He had merely pulled her into a deeper, more treacherous abyss and then cut the rope. The call came as Gio Moretti was reviewing quarterly projections in the silent, wood-paneled office of his brownstone. His phone, a secure, encrypted device, vibrated with an urgency that commanded immediate attention. Adriana, his steely-eyed second-in-command, her voice usually an unshakable monotone, carried a sharp edge of alarm. Giovanni. The vault. A breach. Gio froze, his hand tightening on the receiver until his knuckles went white. The vault. His private sanctuary. Impenetrable. Impossible, he growled, the word a low, dangerous rumble. Not impossible, but confusing. The 18th century Moretti decanter is gone. And Amelia Vance, she's been arrested. Or rather, she was arrested. By two men claiming to be NYPD. She escaped custody. Adriana's voice was clipped, precise, but Gio heard the underlying tremor. Amelia. The name exploded in his mind, a blinding flash of disbelief. Amelia, the woman who spoke to wine, who saw the truth in broken things, who had awakened something fiercely protective within him, a thief, and a clumsy one at that, leaving keys behind? The idea was preposterous. It tasted like ash in his mouth, bitter, violent wrongness. His fury, usually a controlled, glacial burn, ignited into a consuming inferno. He slammed his fist onto the desk, the heavy mahogany groaning in protest. Find her, he commanded, his voice raw, laced with a primal rage. Find her now. And find out who sent those fake officers. Thorne. It has to be Thorne. His mind, a complex web of strategy and intuition, already saw the threads of a meticulously crafted, cruel deception. Thorne, desperate, cornered, seeking to destroy Amelia to wound him, to steal the thing Gio had, without ever explicitly claiming, silently protected. The betrayal, the violation of Amelia's fragile trust, resonated deep within him, a personal affront. Within minutes, the Moretti network, a silent, pervasive organism woven into the very fabric of the city, stirred. Orders, sharp and concise, flew through secure channels. Eyes and ears in every corner, every shadow were activated. The city, usually a chaotic symphony, became a canvas for Joe's ruthless, singular focus. Surveillance footage from Amelia's apartment building was scrubbed, cross-referenced. Witnesses, carefully cultivated over decades, were discreetly questioned. Every detail, every anomaly, was fed directly back to Gio. The truth unspooled with terrifying speed. The two officers were known enforcers for a small-time loan shark, desperate and easily bought. The security footage anomalies were expertly doctored. Thorne, cornered, facing financial ruin and public disgrace, had chosen the most vicious path of all, destroying an innocent to spite a king. He had planted the decanter, faked the key, and orchestrated Amelia's public downfall, banking on Joe's reputation for ruthlessness to seal her fate. He wanted to watch her suffer, to watch Joe's carefully constructed calm shatter. Gio saw it all cold and clear. And his rage, a chilling, absolute force, sharpened into an unstoppable weapon. Thorne, he whispered, his voice a low growl that promised unimaginable pain. He touches what's mine. He dies. The hunt for Amelia was unrelenting. Gio didn't sleep. He directed from his control room, a labyrinth of screens and hushed voices. Every bus route, every train station, every abandoned warehouse, every safe house in the city was scoured. His men, loyal and efficient, understood the implicit command. Amelia Vance was sacrosanct. Her safety was paramount. They worked with a grim determination, knowing the wrath of their boss if she was harmed. Meanwhile, Amelia, a phantom in the rain-slicked labyrinth of the city, ran until her lungs burned and her legs screamed. She shed her elegant obsidian uniform in a forgotten alley, donning discarded, ill-fitting clothes, her expensive shoes quickly ruined by the incessant downpour. The sirens had faded, but the fear remained, a cold, constant companion. She saw Joe's face in every darkened window, heard his voice in every gust of wind, a terrifying specter of betrayal. She ducked into abandoned buildings, hidden shadow doorways, surviving on adrenaline and the desperate need to stay free for Lily. Her heart ached with a pain far deeper than any physical exhaustion, the searing agony of believing Gio had played her, used her, then discarded her. Hours blurred into a grueling, terrifying eternity. The city, once her vibrant home, was now a hostile wilderness. She found herself in the desolate, forgotten industrial district by the docks, seeking refuge in a derelict, half-collapsed warehouse, its broken windows rattling like skeletal teeth in the wind. She was soaked, shivering, and the exhaustion was absolute. Her ankle, twisted in a desperate scramble, throbbed with excruciating pain. Suddenly, a commotion outside. The squeal of tires, shouting voices, the ominous thud-thud of heavy boots on concrete. Amelia's breath hitched. They found me. Her mind screamed, Jill. He's here to finish it. A figure emerged from the driving rain, silhouetted in the gaping maw of the warehouse entrance. Victor Thorne. His face was a contorted mask of desperation and triumph, his clothes disheveled. He clutched a rusty metal pipe, his eyes wild with manic glee. Behind him, two hulking figures, the same fake officers who had arrested her, emerged from the shadows. There you are, little sommelier. Thorne slurred, his voice hoarse, triumphant. Thought you could run from me. Thought your Mafia lover would save you. He spat the word Mafia with contempt. He betrayed you, just like I knew he would. Used you, then left you to rot. Now you're mine. He lunged, the pipe glinting menacingly. Amelia screamed, raw, terrified sound. She scrambled backwards, pain shooting up her ankle, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was cornered, helpless, the fear absolute. Then a sudden, blinding flash. Deafening roar. The warehouse door, already decaying, burst inward with a splintering crash. The force of it sent Thorn and his thug sprawling. And there he was, Giovanni Moretti. He stood framed in the wreckage, a dark, avenging angel, impervious to the lashing rain and the shattered debris. His eyes, usually controlled, blazed with a cold, terrifying fury Amelia had never witnessed. His perfectly tailored suit was gone, replaced by dark, practical tactical gear, and the subtle bulge beneath his jacket hinted at deadly intent. He was no longer the silent observer. He was the king, unleashing his absolute, unbridled wrath. Behind him, a phalanx of his men, armed and silent, poured into the warehouse, securing the perimeter with chilling efficiency. The air crackled with raw power, the scent of rain, metal, and Joe's barely restrained rage. Thorn, scrambling to his feet, stared at Gio, his face contorting from triumph to utter terror. Moretti, what is this? Gio ignored him. His gaze, a physical force, swept the cavernous space, frantically searching. Then he saw her. Amelia, huddled in the corner, bruised, shivering, and bleeding, a silent tear tracking down her rain-streaked cheek. The sight of her, so fragile, so broken, ignited a fresh, searing agony in his chest, a profound guilt for her pain, and a white-hot fury for the man who caused it. He moved, not with haste, but with a predator's deadly certainty. Not towards Thorn, but directly towards Amelia. His strides were long, powerful. He reached her, dropping to one knee, his large hands, surprisingly gentle, cupping her face. His thumb brushed her cheek, wiping away a tear. His dark eyes, still burning with residual fury, now held a profound tenderness, a fierce, possessive relief. Amelia, he murmured, his voice a low, rough caress, laced with a raw, undeniable emotion she had never heard from him. My tesoro, I found you. Amelia stared up at him, her vision blurred by tears and exhaustion. His face, etched with a grim determination, was a sight that tore through her fear and shame, replacing it with an overwhelming, soul-shattering relief. He hadn't betrayed her. He had come for her. He had saved her. The King of Shadows. Her silent protector. The truth, in that moment, was as clear and bright as the lightning that now flashed outside the broken windows. And in his eyes, she saw not just protection, but a fierce, possessive love that threatened to consume her. Amelia awoke to a profound, almost overwhelming sense of peace. It was a sensation so foreign, so deeply unfamiliar after weeks of relentless terror, that it took her a moment to believe it. Sunlight, soft and diffused, streamed through tall, elegant windows, painting gentle patterns on cream-colored walls. She lay in a bed of cloud-like softness, enveloped in silk sheets that whispered against her skin with every slight movement. The air smelled faintly of lavender and a crisp, clean freshness, a stark contrast to the damp, putrid stench of the warehouse. Her body, though still a tapestry of aches and bruises, felt cared for. A bandage was meticulously wrapped around her sprained ankle, throbbing faintly but no longer screaming in protest. Cuts on her hands were cleaned and bandaged. She was no longer shivering. She was safe. The realization brought a fresh wave of tears, silent and cleansing. The door opened softly, and Adriana, Joe's formidable second-in-command, entered. Her expression was as unreadable as ever, but her hands held a tray laden with steaming broth, fresh fruit, and warm tea. Ms. Vance, she said, her voice quiet, almost gentle. Mr. Moretti requested I ensure your comfort. Amelia managed a weak smile. Thank you, Adriana. Where am I? Mr. Moretti's brownstone, Adriana replied, placing the tray on a bedside table. You are quite safe here. Lily is also recovering well at St. Jude's, under enhanced care. She sends her love. The mention of Lily brought a fresh surge of relief, washing away the last vestiges of panic. As the days blended into a luxurious blur of rest and recovery, Amelia began to piece together the fractured memories of the warehouse. Gio, his furious eyes, the silent armed men, his face etched with raw relief when he found her. The memory of his gentle hands cupping her face, his low, raw murmur, "My tesoro," sent a shiver through her, a tremor that had nothing to do with fear. It was a warmth, a deep, resonant hum in her soul. Gio visited her every evening, after the bustling demands of his world had quieted. He would sit by her bedside, a dark, imposing silhouette against the warm lamplight, simply watching her. His presence was a solid, unwavering anchor. He spoke little, but his gaze, stripped of its usual guardedness, conveyed a depth of concern, a fierce possessiveness that Amelia found both terrifying and profoundly comforting. One evening, Amelia finally mustered the courage to ask, "Thorn, what happened to him?" Her voice was barely a whisper, the memory of his snarling face, his desperate rage, still vivid. Joe's jaw tightened, a muscle clenching along his sharp cheekbone. "He is being handled." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, yet Amelia felt the chilling finality in it. "He attempted to breach my trust, to harm someone under my protection. That cannot stand." "What does handle mean?" she pressed, her heart thumping. She had seen the raw, primal fury in the warehouse. She knew what men like Gio were capable of. He met her gaze, his dark eyes unwavering. "It means Victor Thorne will never again hurt anyone, Amelia. Not with words, not with false accusations, not with his pathetic attempts at power. His businesses are gone, his reputation irrevocably destroyed. His debts, the real ones, are being called in. He will be a pariah, a ghost in the city he so desperately craved to dominate. And if he ever dares to raise his head again, then the consequences will be far more permanent." There was no triumph in his voice, only cold, unyielding justice. Amelia listened, a strange, complex cocktail of emotions swirling within her. A knot of fear coiled in her stomach, a visceral understanding of the ruthless world Gio inhabited. But beneath it, a powerful, almost savage satisfaction bloomed. Thorne, who had systematically broken her spirit, who had threatened Lily, who had sought to destroy everything she held dear, was finally facing the consequences. He had been stripped bare, much like he had tried to strip her. The poetic justice of it was undeniable, intoxicating. In this dark, dangerous world, a balance had been restored, brutally and decisively. "He tried to make me believe you betrayed me," Amelia said, her voice laced with the lingering pain of that perceived betrayal. Joe's eyes darkened, a flash of pure, possessive anger. "Never. I don't abandon what's mine, especially not to a worm like Thorne." His large hand reached out, gently cupping her jaw, his thumb brushing over her skin. "I swore I would protect you. I will keep that oath, Amelia. Always." His touch, so gentle yet so firm, sent warmth spreading through her veins, chasing away the last vestiges of fear and doubt. In his eyes, she saw not just a crime boss, but a man who had faced his own betrayals, his own battles, and emerged with a fierce, unwavering loyalty to those he claimed. His world was brutal, yes, but it was also a world of absolute, unshakable protection. A world where promises meant everything. As her physical wounds healed, her emotional ones began to mend under the unwavering gaze of Gio and the subtle kindness of his household. The house staff, mostly older Italian women with warm smiles and knowing eyes, fussed over her, bringing her nourishing, home-cooked meals, their quiet chatter in Italian a comforting lullaby. They treated her not as a guest, but as someone belonging, someone cherished. Joe's cousin, Sophia Castellano, visited often, her sharp mind and blunt honesty a welcome balm. Sophia didn't sugarcoat the dangers of Joe's world, but she spoke of loyalty, of family, and of the profound, unwavering love that could be found within its impenetrable walls. Amelia found herself slowly, tentatively, accepting this new reality, this dangerous, powerful world that had saved her, that protected her sister, that saw her, truly saw her for the first time. The fear was still there, a low hum beneath the surface, but was now tempered by a profound sense of security, of belonging. She had been broken, betrayed, and discarded. But Gio Moretti, the King of Shadows, had not only saved her, but had reclaimed her, piece by piece, weaving her into the formidable tapestry of his world. And in the unwavering intensity of his gaze, in the quiet strength of his presence, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that this was where she belonged now. She was no longer just Amelia Vance, the struggling sommelier. She was Amelia, claimed and protected by the king. And as the last of her bandages came off, a fierce, quiet determination solidified within her. She was ready to stand by his side, ready to build her own dreams within the sanctuary of his protection, ready to face whatever shadows lay ahead. For she knew, with an undeniable certainty, that she was no longer alone. The scent of Sangiovese, rich and earthy, mingled with the crisp aroma of freshly baked focaccia and the faint, sweet perfume of jasmine. It was the scent of Vino Veritas, Amelia's wine bar, a dream lovingly, painstakingly brought to life. Soft, warm lighting spilled from antique sconces onto exposed brick walls, highlighting shelves laden with carefully curated bottles. Worn wooden tables, sourced from reclaimed barn wood, invited lingering conversations, while a small, intimate stage in the corner hinted at future live music. Here, wine was not a status symbol, but a story. And Amelia Vance, standing proudly behind the polished oak bar, was its passionate narrator. This wasn't the obsidian's cold grandeur, nor Thorn's suffocating opulence. This was warmth, authenticity, and light. Every detail, from the hand-painted menu boards to the delicate etchings on the custom glassware, bore Amelia's personal touch. She ran a hand over the smooth, cool surface of the bar, a profound sense of accomplishment swelling in her chest. This was hers, built from the ashes of her shattered past, nurtured by an unexpected, dangerous love. She remembered the relentless despair, the chilling grip of Thorn's threats, the suffocating feeling of being invisible. She remembered the sheer terror of running through the rain-slicked streets, believing herself utterly alone, utterly betrayed. But now, standing in the vibrant heart of her own creation, surrounded by the quiet hum of happy patrons, Amelia felt a completeness she hadn't known was possible. Lily, healthy and thriving, was at home with a trusted caregiver, her laughter echoing freely through their new sunlit apartment, an apartment Gio had insisted on for brighter mornings. The irony was not lost on her. Thorn had built his empire on lies and fear, seeing people as disposable assets. Gio, a man of shadows and unspoken power, had built her kingdom on truth and trust, seeing her as an irreplaceable treasure. She understood now with crystal clarity that his love was not another cage, but a pair of formidable wings. He hadn't just saved her from Thorn, he had saved her from the slow death of her own spirit. He had created the conditions, as he'd once said, for her to rescue herself, and then he'd stood back, letting her soar. A subtle shift in the ambient noise, almost imperceptible dip in the chatter, drew her gaze to the entrance. He was there. Giovanni Moretti. He stood by the heavy oak door, a dark, commanding presence against the soft glow of the evening. Dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, his salt and pepper hair gleaming under the lights, he surveyed the bustling room with that familiar, intense gaze. His eyes, dark as the deepest vintage, swept over the faces, lingering for a moment on the contented smile of an elderly couple, then finally, inevitably, found hers. A jolt, warm and familiar, went through Amelia. It was always like this with Gio. A silent current, a profound understanding that transcended words. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a private acknowledgement that spoke volumes. In his eyes, she saw pride, a possessive satisfaction, and something deeper, something vulnerable and raw that he only ever showed her. He didn't intrude, didn't demand attention, simply existed as her unwavering anchor, her silent guardian in a world she was finally learning to navigate on her own terms. As the evening wound down, the last customers bidding good night, Gio finally approached the bar. Amelia was meticulously polishing glasses, their crystal forms catching the dimming light. "It's magnificent, tesoro," he murmured, his voice the low, gravelly rumble that resonated in the quiet space. He ran a finger along the smooth wood of the bar, his touch both gentle and powerful. "Everything you dreamed of." Amelia met his gaze, a soft smile playing on her lips. More. It's more than I dreamed. Because I didn't dream of it alone. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Thank you, Gio, for everything. For seeing me. For giving me this. He reached out, his hand gently cupping her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. You built this, Amelia. I merely cleared the path, and perhaps provided the occasional bulldozer. His lips curved into a rare, genuine smile, a flash of warmth that softened the hard lines of his face. This is your kingdom. And you are its queen. And you, my king of shadows, she countered, her eyes sparkling, are content to observe from the periphery? His gaze deepened, becoming fiercely possessive. Never periphery, Amelia. Always at your side. Or, if you prefer, in the shadows, ensuring no one ever dares to dim your light again. He paused, his thumb stroking her cheek, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that promised forever. You once asked if my love was a cage. Tell me now, vino veritas, is it? Amelia reached up, covering his hand with hers, pressing it firmly against her face. The calloused warmth, the unspoken strength. It's the freest I've ever been, Gio. Because you don't just love me, you respect me. You challenge me. You let me choose. Her voice thickened with emotion. And I choose you. Every single day. I want a lifetime of choosing you. His eyes, dark as midnight, lit with an unspoken joy, a profound relief. He leaned in, his lips brushing hers in a soft, tender kiss that was a promise sealed, a future claimed. It was not the dramatic public kiss of a showman, but the private, sacred vow of a man who loved with an intensity that bordered on reverence. As they broke apart, breathless, the doorbell jingled again. Amelia looked up surprised, just as the main door swung open. A wave of laughter, boisterous Italian greetings, and the scent of homemade sauce filled the air. Amelia, tesoro, why didn't you tell us you were still working? Nonna Moretti, a tiny, formidable woman with a smile as wide as her heart, marched in, followed by a procession of Joe's family. Sophia Castellano, chic and knowing, gave Amelia a warm hug. Uncle Marco, his flinty eyes now softened with genuine affection, clapped Gio on the back. Even Lily, her cheeks rosy with health, skipped in, heading straight for Amelia's embrace. Mama said you need more patrons, Nonna declared, gesturing around the now bustling bar. And good wine needs good company. We are good company, no? She beamed, then eyed Gio and Amelia with a mischievous glint. But perch no wedding plans yet, Giovanni. This one, she makes you smile. Don't let her go. Gio merely chuckled, a rare deep sound that warmed Amelia's soul. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his side, his gaze meeting hers over the lively chaos of his family. So Nonna. Soon, his eyes held a silent question for Amelia, a question that wasn't about a ring or a ceremony, but about the unspoken future that lay before them. Amelia smiled, a radiant, confident smile, and leaned into his touch, her heart overflowing. The bar filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, the vibrant energy of a family celebrating not just a new business, but a new beginning. Amelia watched them, her heart full. This was home. Not a place, but these people. This loud, chaotic, fiercely loyal family. This man who had shown her that true power lay not in control, but in protection, not in ownership, but in fierce, unwavering love. She had found her vino veritas. Not just a wine bar, but her truth. She was Amelia Vance, sommelier, sister, lover, partner. No longer broken, but whole. Not despite the damage she had survived, but because of it. And as she looked out at the thriving, vibrant space she had created, with Joe's arm warm and solid around her, she knew that this was just the beginning. Her kingdom, forged in love, guarded by a king, and eternally, magnificently her own. Isn't it profound how the deepest wounds often become the gateways to our greatest strengths? Amelia's journey reminds us that true self-worth is never lost, merely waiting to be reclaimed. Even when cast aside and betrayed, her spirit, like the finest vintage, only grew richer. She found a love that wasn't a gilded cage, but powerful wings, a mafia boss who saw beyond her brokenness to the queen within, protecting her fiercely as she built her own kingdom, Vino Veritas. If you've ever felt invisible or believed your past dictated your future, remember, you are inherently worthy of a love that truly frees you. If this story ignited a spark of hope in your heart today, please like this video. Subscribe to join our community of resilient spirits, and let us know in the comments. I am worthy because your story, like Amelia's, deserves to be told.